I recently replayed Daxter and Secret Agent Clank, two PSP spin-offs where you play as the sidekicks. And after finishing them both, one of these is way better than I expected. So the question is, which sidekick actually got the better game? So starting with Secret Agent Clank, the main plot kicks off with Ratchet being accused of stealing the Eye of Infinity. He gets framed and suddenly you're thrown into the mystery of trying to clear his name while tracking down the real culprit and the Eye itself. One of my biggest issues with this story is how it clashes with what came before. In the previous Ratchet and Clank game, Clank's secret agent role is explicitly part of a TV show. It's fictional and it's for comedy, it's not real. Yet here, the game just straight up treats it like Clank is an actual secret agent, with no real explanation or transition. It feels like it's rewriting its own setup without actually acknowledging what came before. And then you've got the Quark sections, and honestly, they don't really add anything. They just were kind of there. There's no real narrative weight and no meaningful payoff. It's just padding, I think, for the sake of it. Overall, I think it really gives the impression that the writers either didn't fully engage with the previous games or just rushed this out without caring too much about the continuity. Now for Daxter, on the other hand, and it feels like the complete opposite. The game is set during the 2-year gap between Jak 1 and Jak 2. And even though the opening is a bit random, we just kind of start working for Osmo with no major setup, it doesn't take long before it finds its footing. By the second half of the game, the story actually starts weaving itself into the larger Jak universe in a really smart way. It connects back to the events from both Jak 2 and 3 and genuinely feels like the developers really understood and respected the original games. Even the humor lands here. I actually found myself laughing a couple of times. It really did keep that classic Daxter personality intact without feeling forced. And overall, it just works. It stands out well on its own, but it also fits neatly into the wider story. And because of that, I think this one easily goes to Daxter. Starting with Secret Agent Clank, and the biggest issue here has to be the camera. It's really frustrating to control, especially during combat. It often refused to move the way that you wanted it to, and it was also zoomed way too close in on Clank. That makes it really hard to read what's coming next, which honestly feels like the reason they had to add those warning symbols on the edges of the screen in the first place. I actually really enjoyed the double jump though. You unlock it a bit into the game, and for whatever reason, it just feels really crisp to use. But on the other hand, the hover feels slow and just kind of unresponsive, which really makes the platforming sections feel heavier than they should be. Another issue that I kind of ran into was when I turned on the locked strafe mode. If you start moving at an angle, Clank will just randomly stop running and start walking instead, which became really annoying in the tighter platforming moments where precision actually matters. Now moving on to Daxter, and this immediately feels like a step up in comparison. It's not perfect. The vehicle sections are probably the weakest here. You can really feel the limitation of the PSP's single analog stick, and driving just doesn't feel as smooth or as natural as the rest of the game. But outside of that, everything just feels way more refined. Daxter's animations are super clean, and overall the game feels way more optimized than Secret Agent Clank. I still had some minor camera issues, but it's nowhere near as noticeable as Clank's game. And the standout here has definitely got to be the hover mechanic. It just feels great to use, and the platforming is clearly built around it in a way that makes the movement feel fluid and fun. So yeah, this one easily goes to Daxter. Starting with Secret Agent Clank, and for a game that's supposed to be about Clank, we actually spend a surprising amount of time playing as completely different characters, which I really didn't like. With Ratchet, you get these arena-style sections similar to the second and third game, where you're just surviving waves of enemies. A problem is, a lot of the enemies are just straight up bullet sponges, which turns the fights into more of a grind than actually being fun or engaging. Then we also get to play as Quark for the first time outside of the vid comics. These sections are fine, but mostly they really didn't add much. They just feel like padding to stretch out the game rather than adding any meaningful gameplay variety. When you get back to playing as Clank, I actually really like the ideas behind his weapon sets. Things like the cufflink bombs and the tire rang are creative and fit his secret agent theme really well. But even here, the same issue carries over. Enemies have way too much health, and you end up dumping huge amounts of ammo into basic encounters. Now for Daxter, and I'll admit, at the start of this, I really thought that this was going to be the weakest part of this game. Early on, you're basically just stuck with a single basic combo for dealing with metalheads, but the further you get into the game, the more it opens up in a really satisfying way. You unlock the sprayer and then more attachments for it, and that's where the combat really starts to improve. I did have some frustrations early on with the hit detection on the standard sprayer and the bug zapper. It can feel a little bit inconsistent and you definitely take some unnecessary damage. But once you get things like the flamethrower, combat becomes a lot more fun and way more manageable. It just feels good to use, and it starts to click in a way the early game doesn't really show you. Overall, Secret Agent Clank spreads itself way too thin by throwing in too many playable characters instead of focusing on Clank's own mechanics, which were really fun here, while Daxter actually builds and refines a simple combat kit into something really satisfying. This one goes to Daxter. Starting with Clank again, and the main thing that this game is actually about is stealth, which is kind of surprising considering I haven't even mentioned it properly until now. It's introduced right at the start as a core mechanic, but as the game goes on, it slowly stops feeling like the main focus and more like a side activity. In fact, the whole game starts to feel less like one cohesive experience and more like a collection of minigames stitched together. One mission you're doing stealth, then rhythm sections, then combat, then the Ratchet battle arenas, and then the Quark section. It just constantly rotates like that. It feels like every other mission has you playing as a different character doing something completely unrelated. The stealth sections themselves aren't terrible though. The ideas like the holo monocle to disguise yourself as other robots is really cool in theory, but in practice I found it quite frustrating to get it to line up properly. It just didn't feel as good as it should have. I did like the laser sections with the blackout pen though. It was a smart idea. The problem is that it feels kind of underutilized because they can't let you buy the ammo. Otherwise, you'd be able to skip through the entire section with no lasers. But at the same time, they really don't give you enough to really experiment with it either. But now for Daxter, and this is where things feel immediately more cohesive. You actually get a smaller, more accurate slice of Haven City here, and it leans slightly into an open world structure compared to Clank's very linear mission design. The levels also have way more verticality, which really rewards you for mastering the hover mechanic. Movement and level design actually work together here in a way that feels intentional. That said, Daxter does occasionally suffer from not always being clear on which way you're supposed to go, but I think that comes down to the lack of a minimap rather than bad level design. The dream sequences were also a surprise. I really didn't expect them, and while I enjoyed them to a point, I'm not the biggest fan of this type of gameplay where you just push a button when you're prompted to. I think it kind of breaks the flow of the game for me. But one thing Daxter absolutely nails is making Haven City feel huge and oppressive, especially during the Crimson Guard sections. You really feel small in this already established world. Overall though, Daxter just stands out with much more creative and thoughtful level design. So yeah, again, this one goes to Daxter. And I was actually surprised here because this one was a lot tougher to decide than I expected. I think both of these games have really strong soundtracks, but it really comes down to what you are looking for in the music. Secret Agent Clank definitely has a more memorable soundtrack. It feels like they took the original Ratchet & Clank style and just gave it a full spy movie twist, which really fits the theme well. Daxter, on the other hand, has great music too, but it's more atmospheric. It fits the world really well and helps with immersion, but it really didn't leave me with many standout memorable tracks after playing. But I think this section ultimately comes down to the sound design rather than the music. And in that case, Secret Agent Clank suffers from the same issue as size matters. The weapons just don't have enough punch or impact. It makes the combat feel a bit flat in terms of feedback. On the other hand though, Daxter has really strong sound design. It's full of small details that you don't really need, but they add a lot to the experience. Like the subtle hum of the fly swatter weapon. It's those kinds of touches that make everything feel a bit more alive and polished. So I think overall, in terms of music and sound design, I think Daxter takes this one. So this is the first time in this series where one game has completely outclassed the other in every single category. I think Secret Agent Clank just tried to do way too much at once. It spreads itself way too thin, throwing in too many ideas, too many gameplay styles, and way too many playable characters, without really letting any of them fully shine. Meanwhile, the team behind Daxter put a lot of effort into making it feel like a part of the wider universe. It actually respects the lore, fits neatly into the timeline, and still manages to work as its own standalone experience at the same time. And because of that, I would 100% say Daxter is the better Sidekick game, and it's aged a lot better than Secret Agent Clank. But what do you think? Which PSP spin-off was better, Secret Agent Clank or Daxter? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.